That is the question I really came to answer. Here is my solution. This is the cure for cancer I'm holding in my hand. And the cure is not in the syringe. The cure is in the needle. Henry Ford said something very important. 1909, he said, if I asked my customers what they want, they would have said a faster horse. Instead, I gave them an automobile. So I'm saying that the Sentinel is a Concorde in the time of horse carriages.
Azra, your work as an oncologist, as a medical professional, it's incredible, and you've done so much in the field. And your book is titled The First Cell, which is a beautiful title. And let's dissect that a bit. Why would you name a book The First Cell? And for all those watching or listening, this is fundamentally about cancer, something you've been fundamentally affected by personally and in your work life. In search for the first cell, are we actually chasing something far more human, a way to live wisely or die well? And if you could redesign the entire cancer research apparatus, scientifically, ethically, philosophically, what would it look like?
I think that's a great beginning, Tev, actually, because to lay out right up front, my concept of the first cell goes to the heart and soul of this whole discussion that's about to come. In summary, the title, The First Cell, and the human costs of pursuing cancer to the last, is a cry against human ego, pride, hubris, arrogance, thinking that we can take something at end stage monstrous disease and still be able to dissect everything, understand every single genetic change signaling pathway, and reverse it and cure cancer. So that is my concept, that the first cell is an idea where you don't wait for complexity to develop and think you can solve it from that point on, and rather start at just trying to detect what is the first evidence of that wellness to illness transition. Can we pick that up? That should be the earliest consequence. And the second thing around this concept of the first cell is, those of us like you and me who go to medical school, we really go to medical school with this whole concept, since whenever we decided to go to med school, the idea is go in and treat illness. And so you automatically only think of treatment. You don't think of finding it before it becomes treatment. And so I'm actually challenging the entire Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm. Remember, that's how it begins. I'm saying first preempt all harm. That's the concept of the first cell.
So it's a complete philosophical shift in thinking. And I think when you look at society today, we're fundamentally, you can sort of see a change in this entire world where people are looking at wellness and trying to realize that, look, when you wait for illness, you're probably too late. And I think your work encapsulates this perfectly. You're trying to make sure that people understand that we cannot wait. In fact, waiting is the problem. And as doctors today, we shouldn't be focusing on treating illness. It should be more about prevention and more about looking before something occurs. With that said, Azra, how would you define cancer?
Again, that goes to the heart of the thing. People think of cancer as a genetic disease, for example. To me, it is anything but, because that is too reductionist a thing. The way I think of cancer, and I'll give you an example of a sand pile effect, which is if you start dropping sand, grains of sand, one by one, they will make a pile. And they will keep forming a pile that becomes in the shape of a pyramid. But then you drop one grain of sand and suddenly the pile collapses. If you are looking for the reasons for collapsing of the pile or this avalanche that happened in the properties of the last grain of sand you dropped, then you're completely mistaken, because that last grain of sand was no different than the rest of the hundreds of thousands that came before it. The difference was in the pile, which had become unstable, which was under crisis. And so the whole idea of cancer that appears is, to me, much more of a systemic disease than it has been assigned credit for. Because if you think of pancreatic cancer, very often it will begin with something that over 150 years ago was named the Trousseau sign, right? It's suddenly somebody will present with a clot in their shin, in their calf, sorry. And so you are thinking, clot in the calf, why would they have that? And they turn out to have pancreatic cancer. So, what is this systemic reaction, this thromboembolic event that happened far away from the organ of origin? It is a systemic illness. And that we are ignoring all of those things. Second important thing about what's cancer, cancer is directly, the incidence of cancer is directly proportional to age. For instance, myelodysplastic syndromes, a form of pre-leukemia that I am an expert in, the incidence is 2 per 100,000 at the age of 50. But at the age of 70 to 80, it is 80 per 100,000. So, what has changed? Aging. What is happening in aging? Every system is becoming a little decrepit. So, it's a systemic failure where that one last grain of sand or one genetic mutation could cause the whole system to shut down. And those are called power laws, where the crisis occurs in terms of power laws. So I think this is the way I think of cancer. This is the way I think of the first cell. This is the way I think of the whole healthcare system that has evolved to treat disease and illness and give yourself gold medals and Nobel Prizes for that, whereas ignoring everything that is coming before. Do you agree with me?
I think you're absolutely right. And there's it sort of shows us our own ignorance and the limits of knowledge. I mean, do you think that our focus on late stage interventions reflect a deeper failure in how medicine understands and applies knowledge in general? Well, of course you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
I mean, absolutely. Because the whole idea behind cancer, behind medicine acquiring knowledge has been reduced to mapping genes, identifying pathways, understanding the immune system, trying to really go into details uh, of all kinds of microscopic events, etc. But all that knowledge gives you power, yes, because knowledge is power. But if that power is applied to the wrong end of the treatment paradigm, then it can become very dangerous and hurtful. And that, I'm afraid, is what we are doing, because all of that technology we are using to define all these things should be applied to finding the first cell and what has gone wrong at inception, rather than waiting and applying it at that stage. So here I feel there's a big sort of big gap between all this mountains of petabytes of knowledge versus using it wisely. And what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Simply, while knowledge is power, wisdom is using that knowledge with empathy, with compassion, with mercy in your heart. Because for God's sake, we are doctors. We are supposed to help patients and reduce their suffering, which doesn't just come with disease. There are psychological traumas. There's a whole violation, which are not just psychic and emotional and spiritual, but all kinds of violations. So I feel like your question about this knowledge thing is a very key question in medicine right now, because we are accumulating mountains of knowledge, but at the wrong kind of things, is what I'm saying, and using it badly.
Yes,
What do you think of that? Do you agree with me?
I think I do, and it's not just. I mean, within the cancer research field, you're right. It's within medicine. It's almost a cancer within medicine itself. It's it's ironic that that's exactly what's happening, and you see this all the time with obesity, with heart disease, all these typical illnesses that we know if you could preempt all of this, treat it as if it's always been a thing that might occur. We can reduce risk so much. We know that all the food that we eat is processed, refined carbs, all these negative aspects to reality, smoking, alcohol, etc. It just doesn't stop. But it's still so socially accepted, and it's become part of life in such a systemically infected way that it's difficult to find the first cell and locate it and treat it at this point. But for anyone who's not familiar with your work and hasn't read the book, if you had to describe the aim of finding the first cell and what that entails, what that does, and how looking at it from this lens would change the landscape of medicine, how would you express this or explain it
Yeah.
to?
That is the question I really came to answer. Here is my solution. This is the cure for cancer I'm holding in my hand. And the cure is not in the syringe. The cure is in the needle. What is in the needle? In the needle is a stent, like a coronary stent. Literally, a coronary stent was taken by two brilliant biomedical engineers, Sam Sia and Ken Shepard at Columbia University. And I've been working with them for a decade on this whole concept. And what they did, Tev, is they took a coronary stent and they fabricated it with electronics. So they put two electrodes, two transducers, and built in a little chip, which is a computer. And this stent is folded up, is present in this needle. So this stent can be injected in your subclavian vein and it stays there. And what it does is, this is the device, an implantable device we call the Stentinel. Do you like the name? Sentinel. Sam Sia came up with the name Stentinel. So the Stentinel's job is literally to stay in your body forever, like a coronary stent, and detect the first cell. How does it do so? Well, the stent will create an electric field between its two walls, or in its circumference. An electric field is created. Any cell that passes through the electrical field is going to cause impedance of electricity, which is immediately recorded as a signal on the computer or chip that is built onto the stent. So if a cell is small, it creates a small signal which is recorded. But we have shown that the first cell is a giant cell. Think of it like this: if the largest white blood cell is like 14, 15 microns in size, these cells can be 100 to 300 microns in size, because our work has shown that the first cell is really a hybrid combination of two cells that fuse under stress. So think of it, this stent sitting in your vein forever can not only detect the first cell going through, because it's a giant cell by size and impedance of electrical current, they can program it to electrocute that cell. This needle that you're seeing and the stent in it has cost $50 million, 10 years of work, just to make the stent. So this didn't happen overnight, but it is ready for prime time. Now, what is my contribution to the Stentinel? My contribution is, okay, you guys make the stent, and I'm going to identify what we need to detect through it. So in 2015, that is exactly 10 years ago, I fit my research lab with a filtration device and just started filtering the blood of my patients who have pre-leukemia, hoping to find the first leukemia cell. I would just filter their blood, and the first leukemia cell, as you know, blasts are larger than normal cells. So I thought by size. So we worked with a company from France called Rare Cells, who gave us who did a beautiful collaborative research project with us. And after filtering hundreds and hundreds of patients, we saw that there are these giant cells. What are they? And when we went to look into the literature, it turns out that people who have been working in the area have found that every single person with a solid cancer, whether the cancer is in the brain, in the ovaries, in the lungs, in the liver, these giant cells are found circulating in the blood. And they are associated with relapse and recurrence. So we also started finding these giant cells. So while the biomedical engineers made the stent, we found the cells, and now I have been collecting tissues of blood, saliva, bone marrow, biopsies, everything on my patients since 1984. Today, I have the largest tissue repository in the world of patients whose samples have been saved longitudinally as they go through natural histories of their cancer. And so I have this entire tissue repository. Of course, I've published hundreds of papers studying smaller numbers of samples from here and made important biologic insights. But I've always saved extra samples from every single sample I take, that ultimately when the multi-omics technology, when the right technology comes along, I want to have all the samples to go and find the biomarkers. So basically, my idea is revolutionize early detection to cure cancer. Don't wait for cancer to become the end stage disease and try to treat it, which has failed for 50 years. You've been trying, you haven't succeeded very much, except occasional successes. By and large, if you have stage 4 cancer, mostly you die. So the idea is to cure cancer, revolutionize early detection. Early detection means since no age is immune from cancer, you need to have detection available from birth to death. And since cancer is a silent killer, it can come anytime. You can't afford to do the test once a year or once every 6 months. You got to have continuous monitoring of your body, like treat the body as a machine and just monitor for everything you possibly can continuously. So this sentinel, Tev, can scan the entire 5 liters of blood that will pass through the stent every 18 days. So every 18 days, once the stent is in, we are finding the first cell and electrocuting it right there. Could you imagine a better paradigm for any disease? And the sentinel will be able to detect dementia, any biomarkers, because the biomedical engineers, Ken and Sam, are so brilliant. They have used this small molecule um, field electronics transistor technology also to detect small pieces of protein, small pieces of RNA, small pieces of DNA, not just large cells. They can do all of this now. So any disease is going to shed its own unique biomarkers, pick it up early, and boom, take care of it right there. That's my paradigm.
It's
Do you like?
I love it. It's pretty incredible because when you when you look at this, firstly I have many questions come to mind. One would be when you saw Ken and Sam's work. At what point did you guys first start collaborating? When did you realize you're onto something with the Sentinel? And the other thing is, how's the reception been when you look at current oncologists and the community, the scientific community? How's that been with the reception?
So how long? Well, when I started to do the filtration on my patients 10 years ago, I also looked to see who can I work with in terms of biomedical engineers. And at Columbia, Sam Sia had come from MIT, and he had established, he was there for 7 years when I discovered him, and he had formed this thing called Lab on a Chip. So I looked into the Columbia biomedical guys, and I sought him out, and I went and met him. And in fact, he has written part of the thing in my book is by him and about him. I've written about him and about this whole concept of doing things with him. So the book was published 6 years ago already. So I had been working with Sam for a while. So practically 10 years we've been working on it. And as I said, it has taken $50 million, 10 years of work. It's a lot of stuff gone into it. We didn't know what we are going to develop as we were working in our respective labs, but then our things kept coming together. And as I'm developing these markers, I don't want to test for them once a year. I don't want to test for them once every 6 months. So we keep talking about and developing these similar things. How has the reception been? For 40 years, I have been saying the same thing, which is early detection and prevention. No one can accuse me of being inconsistent. Please go back 40 years in my career and look at any of my papers. My point was I started by treating acute myeloid leukemia. Immediately, within a few years, it was clear to me that in my lifetime, this deadly disease won't be cured. So I asked myself, what's a good news we can give a cancer patient when we tell them their diagnosis? The only good news is we found it early. So how do you find leukemia early? Because by the time you diagnose, there are hundreds of millions of cells all over. So I said the only way to find it is find people who are at risk of getting leukemia. And very quickly, I found there are those patients who they are labeled as pre-leukemia or myelodysplastic syndrome. So in 1984, I turned my entire focus to MDS, pre-leukemia, and following these patients as they develop leukemia. So I have been saying this constantly. Everyone I speak to, I give tons of talks and podcasts and written a book. I mean, I'm trying everything possible. People listen to me and say, yes, we know that. Early detection is early, but the money, the grant money is in finding this or establishing this model. So why aren't you studying human samples? Because the money is all in mouse models. It's such a travesty that 2 million patients, new patients, are diagnosed with cancer every year. 2 million. And a few thousand samples are saved by a couple of researchers. No one thinks of saving samples. Why? Because they have developed this delusional system that's taking human cells, putting them into some damaged, immunocompromised mouse or some petri dish and treating it and developing a treatment is going to work. Well, 95% of those are still failing today. Those preclinical testing platforms that yield the treatment strategies, the failure rate today of any experimental therapy in cancer is 95%. And the 5% that succeed, in my opinion, should have failed because they are prolonging survival of 30% patients by 2.1 months and becoming financially ruined in the bargain because the cost is 100,000 to more. CAR Ts cost $1 million. I mean, the whole system is so delusional, so sick, and so absurd that you would laugh unless it was tragically taking human lives every day.
Yeah.
To this day, I'm the one seeing 30 to 40 cancer patients in my clinic every week. I'm the one on the front line. I'm the one treating them. So, how am I going to face them and say that in 1977, I was treating your acute leukemia with two drugs that we referred to as 7 and 3, because 7 days of Aracy, 3 days of donomycin. Today in 2025, I have the same two drugs to offer you, 7 and 3. How shameful is it? But people are doing it every day around me without even thinking about it. So you tell me, what should be the reception I would expect from this field that has treated me so badly for 40 years?
Mm. It's disappointing, but also exciting to know that you guys have done some groundbreaking work, even though there's this tension. I mean, I have one of my questions here was about hope, honesty, and harm. How do you navigate the tension between offering hope and being honest in the clinic, especially when aggressive treatments do more harm most of the time than good?
Well, that question takes us to a very important area that I'm interested in, which is what is the difference between cure and healing? For most of the time, we don't have cures for at least the leukemias I'm treating unless you send them to transplant, which is possible for less than 5% patients, and the results of that are very horrible too. So, for most patients, the disease will take their lives. And how, I mean, can imagine that I've had thousands and thousands of these conversations continuously with patients. So that's where you learn the difference between cure and healing. And the way I think of it is in terms of a couplet from Urdu, which is my language. And I'll read the couplet, translate for you, and tell you the meaning because you've asked a profound question right now. This is not, cannot be answered in some glib kind of way. Ghalib, one of our greatest poets, has a couplet that says, तौफीक बअंदाज़े हिम्मत है अज़ल से आंखों में है वो कतरा जो गौहर न हुआ था. Your success depends on your endurance. How much can you tolerate? How much are you going to risk? That's the first line. Endurance is important. But the second line is so shocking. The teardrop in your eye is the one that didn't become the pearl. And so when you connect the two lines, let me explain it to you. The two lines are connected by a concept in our poetry, which is that if the season's first rains, first few raindrops go into the mouth of a clam, they become a pearl. So now Ghalib, the poet, is trying to console those raindrops that were not the first raindrops of the first rain of the season, because now they have no chance of becoming a pearl, right? By definition. So Ghalib is telling them, think of it. If you don't become a pearl, you weren't lucky enough to be the first raindrop. You now have a chance of becoming that teardrop that comes out of the eye of a lover. And how much more meaningful is that one teardrop compared to a pearl? So, my point is, while cure is that pearl, healing is that teardrop, that empathy, that compassion, realizing that once there is no hope, then you can't look a year ahead or even, months ahead. Then the lack of hope becomes the driver for now. Because suddenly you can't hope to go forward, so now becomes important. Everything you haven't done becomes more precious. Every relationship you have not nourished, you need to do something about. Suddenly you have a chance to do all of that. So, with my patients, while I'm trying for the pearl, the cure, I'm also offering that teardrop, the time with them. Presence rather than procedures are as important here. Talking to them, helping them navigate these last stages of their journey of life, helping them reconnect with everything that they possibly can and have to, and giving them not just false hope, but hope in other things that become very meaningful. I hope that answers this question.
It does. I think firstly, that was a very beautiful couplet, and the application of the way you brought that into this topic is also profound, and it's a great way to sort of think of this, and that cure not being the sole importance. Do you think that capitalism and like within healthcare has become the, let's say, I mean, I don't like to, this is fundamentally a philosophical podcast, of course, and it's not usually medical, but when I read through your work, and Mike Levin was the one who introduced us, Mike's been a guest on this channel many times, and when I read through it, I figured that this, if I'm going to do something about medicine, it needs to have this deep philosophical meaning behind it, and yours does, and you've touched on that right now. This mind and body connection, meaning. In your experience, how much have you seen the impact of mental stress, mental states, grief, resilience, and even people's perceptions of meaning affect the course of their illnesses?
A lot. hands down, there is a lot of effect of how you are handling the disease, presence, mindfulness, how the journey becomes so much less painful, but has actual effect on the disease process, in fact. Because there are now many, many studies to show that uh, how these kinds of even breathing exercises, even mindfulness that is practiced through meditation, can improve immune responses, can bring a more positive uh, light for everything. I mean, right now, as you know, that our entire healthcare system is profit driven. It is something where a patient has become a consumer, and illness is being treated as a market. And to me, one of the most perverse results of this kind of thinking is that all the negative studies are just buried. They're not even talked about. But the minor glimmer, one patient responded out of 49 treated, will become the anecdote that's talked about on every international meeting stage. So I feel like this whole revenue generating thing has brought an absence of the real physician role that we are supposed to play, and acceptance of death and the necessity of walking people through death, which is coming for all of us, is now considered a defeat, a failure. Well, death is not a failure. Denying death is a failure. Accepting death and helping people navigate this difficult journey is so important, not just for mindfulness, but even for their disease that feels less burdensome, even if it is not being actually helped, which there are studies that show it can be actually helped. But I don't want to go out there and have every scientist attack me and say, oh, she believes in all this voodoo stuff of positive thinking, etc. I think there's clearly things to be said for positive thinking. Yes.
Mm. I agree. I think that it's very difficult. I mean, people want a quick fix. They want the easiest option, and sometimes the easiest option is just not the answer. I mean, it takes, as you said, endurance, effort, putting in the work, exercise, eating well, diet, locating the first cell, which seems to be a task that takes years, of course, to do. How, in terms of the not I wouldn't say reception, but knowing that there could be something so profoundly impactful, like having this device, the Sentinel, having this piece of equipment that can change the game completely. Do you think that because of the profitable companies out there, that your work gets shoved down a little bit lower due to this urge for money and profit? Because I mean, it's not going to be, unless this product itself is sold as an expensive product. Once we start finding cures and making this cheaper and easily implementing it, it's going to drastically reduce costs over time, which wouldn't work with this current market, especially now knowing that within certain countries, funding for cancer research has dropped significantly since recent political developments.
Yeah. Well, the first idea I came from a third world country. I come from Pakistan. And every year when I would go back to Pakistan, especially when my parents were alive for the first 25 years, I had to see patients constantly because my mother would have a long list of patients I had to go visit and provide free care to them. And it's almost criminal to not democratize medicine, to develop therapies that belong to only the very rich few. Even in this country, we are just robbing patients. Do you know that 42% of all people who are diagnosed with cancer in America, 42%, that's nearly half, will become completely financially ruined by the second year? So forget third world. We in the first world, we have brought the whole system on the verge of a collapse because of our greed and hubris. But you know, Henry Ford said something very important. 1909, he said, if I asked my customers what they want, they would have said a faster horse. Instead, I gave them an automobile. So I'm saying that the Sentinel is a Concorde in the time of horse carriages. And once the word processor came along, who cares about the companies making typewriter ribbons? Who cares? The whole system flipped immediately by itself. That's what I'm saying. Once this thing comes along, no matter how much opposition there is, it's going to flip the system, because if you don't want to use it here, Korea and Pakistan and China will start using it. So I think that, and I'm not some defeatist. I hope that's very clear to you that I've been fighting the system for 40 years. And if anything, I'm more energized every day because I'm refusing to stop seeing patients. They are my real inspiration. And until I can help them, I'm not going to rest. One of my favorite books is Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution. He published that in the 60s. But the point he made it very true is that there is a paradigm that exists at the moment. We tend to accept that paradigm. Currently, that paradigm in cancer is treat cancer with slash, poison, or burn. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. That is our paradigm. So what is happening is that all our resources are being pushed into developing and supporting this paradigm, developing treatments for end stage. The anomalies that appear, for example, the treatments you are developing are failing 95% of the time. They're being ignored. The negative studies are being buried, right? So nobody wants to think that I'm investing in a company that has a 95% failure rate. But everyone wants to invest in that treatment paradigm, and no one wants to invest in this. I'm saying if I get $10 million today, within 18 months, I'll have it in people. How fast? How can you accelerate 18 months, for God's sake? But do you know what I'm meeting? Total resistance. No, oh, Azra, no early detection devices. They're not going to be funded. Nobody's interested. Well, I said we have electrocuting technology. It could be treatment also. Well, show us first. Well, to get there to show you, I need this money, of course. So that's the point. And I'm not asking for $10 million because I'm out there with my begging bowl. You can invest it in a company that will support me, not my company, but that will give the money for this. So what the point I'm trying to make is that markets have a nasty habit of flipping quickly and learning and ditching their old masters if they see that there is profitability at this end now. They'll flip around completely, so I'm not worried. And by the way, the stent right now costs $80, less than $100. So the insertion will take $5,000, the procedure. And every year you just have to pay a subscription fee of $5,000 because the data, petabytes of data every second are being generated in a cloud over your head and AI analyzed to alert the system on your cell phone. You will just get an alert on your cell phone saying a giant cell has been detected and electrocuted.
And immediately, yeah.
So, yeah. So for 10 years, you're only spending $55,000. That's it. For 10 years, 5,000 a year and 5,000 for the insertion. Compare that to $150,000 where you have 30% chance of response and 70% chance that you will be damaged physically and financially.
Yeah, you said it wonderfully. I mean, we're drowning in data, but starving for wisdom. And you're right, we're stuck in that Kuhnian science loop. And that was one of my questions for you at some point was, we're just busy refining a broken model rather than searching for new technologies and implementing them in a way that's clearly more cost effective and far more protective and preventative.
Absolutely. I mean, but Kuhn himself pointed out that the change will come when there is a crisis in confidence. That people are, there are a lot of billionaires in America now. 700 billionaires this year have been recorded and thousands of multimillionaires. Now that they have all this money, they want to live forever also. And they are realizing that the biggest risk to their lives in 60s and 70s is now cancer. And they're also realizing that all the companies that they have supported have not provided the treatment they were hoping for. And now, as you said, wellness markets are becoming much more fashionable, of course, and lifestyle changes, etc., which is great. I love all that. And they are realizing that maybe early detection is a good idea. So I think there is a crisis of confidence coming not from scientists and academics, but from billionaires and tech venture capitalists, etc., who are now at risk themselves. So unless there was that emotional investment, I don't think we would be able to flip the system. But now I'm feeling more confident just because of the reasons I said, which are horrible reasons, and not some academic realizing that we were wrong. And
Yeah.
it's you have to admit that what you've been doing hasn't worked. Nobody is willing to admit that.
And you're right. You see these social influencers and people like Brian Johnson, I think that's his name, but
Yes,
trying to live forever. Yeah, you can see the impact that they're having on people. Because whether they're right or wrong, the status quo is shifting and it's changing.
yeah.
There is some sort of a change occurring.
Yeah, I feel that too. By the way, Brian Johnson is not all that wrong. I to treat a disease pre-leukemia, and for many of my patients, the only problem is a very profound anemia for which they need blood transfusions. So we try treatments which are 2 or 3 at most, and then we have nothing to offer them. But they can live for years, decades even. I have some patients now who I've been treating for more than 20 years. One of those patients, I'll give her the name Donna. Her son called me. He said, my mother is 87 years old. I'm 57. She looks younger than me. Why? I said, because every 2 weeks I'm giving her blood from a young person for the last 17 years. And she has so much energy for 17 years, 2 units of blood every 2 weeks. She's gallivanting the globe. She is one day in Aspen and one day in South Africa, uh, going for some, wonderful safari. I mean, that woman has so much energy and looks your age, like 30.
Yeah, that's right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, but and also I'm in South Africa, so hopefully that safari will help me.
Yes. But I was saying Brian Johnson has
No, I think
something there because he takes blood from his son.
yes, yes, and I think there's the more he's doing, the more doctors, physicians, surgeons they have to keep up with it because if they stumble upon something that's quite unique and not something we know about, we're automatically going to be deemed ignorant and not really following the data. So if we're ignoring it, it's just as bad as even following something we think might be wrong. We sort of have to be intrigued by it.
Yes,
So yeah,
agreed.
it's a tough one. You have I mentioned Michael Evans just now because one of the things I was thinking about within this revolution that's occurring is the breakthroughs in the scientific and philosophical realms and all the shifts in changes in the way we think about consciousness, humanity, meaning, purpose. And Michael Evans, one of those people where his work's blurring the lines of what we think of a cell, what we think a cell is, how it communicates. How does a cancer cell maybe communicate with the rest of its cells, knowing now that electrical signals transmit information? Firstly, how do you and Michael know each other? Because he was the one who highly recommended your work. And thanks, Michael, for that. And how do you think his work has also shaped and influenced the field and will impact us as doctors one day?
Well, let me say that I love Michael. Michael, I love you. I adore you. I think you're the smartest scientist alive right now. And I think you should get the Nobel Prize. I met him serendipitously through a cancer and evolution symposium that was held during COVID days. I met him on Zoom. I've never met him in person, but I became obsessed with the guy. His work is so incredible. And the first thing that fascinated me is that he takes this little worm called
Planaria.
uh, planarium. And if you split the planarium into two, then the head develops a tail and the tail develops a head. So he introduces an electric current and splits them, electric current in the dish. And when he splits them, the tail part develops 5 heads. The beauty is when you split that 5 headed monster into two, now every tail part will develop the 5 heads. So how did this information, this monstrosity was first created, this five-headed monster, but then it has become inherited. Now, every time you do it to that worm, it's going to have five heads. How? Because no genes were changed. Nothing like that happened. And Michael so cleverly has shown that 70% decisions that a cell makes about what it's going to do, 70% of those decisions are decided by the cell membrane. And the most important thing on the cell membrane is the electrical potential, the exchange of those molecules. And I think what he is doing is exactly what I need to combine with my early detection thing. That clearly the ion channels on a fused stressed cell that has become a giant cell are going to be very different than they are on single cells. And so, how can we use those kinds of information to design zapping treatments, which are completely non toxic? And so, this is what I am intellectually very, very interested in collaborating with Michael. And we keep talking about these things and exchanging ideas. And just talking to smart people like Michael, I tell you, it is such a relief for me because I'm constantly surrounded by 99.9% people I talk to only work on mice. And their only excuse is because that's where the grant money is. Their children have to go to college. So I call it paycheck oncology. We have to work for our paycheck, so we have to follow the money trail. So there are very few people who are going to think differently because the system just isn't designed to encourage that. Luckily, I came from as an outsider, so I wasn't indoctrinated with all these ideas. Being a foreigner, being an immigrant in this country has really helped me, Tev, because I refuse to think like the rest of them.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
It hasn't been easy, but then life isn't easy. Who wants an easy life?
yeah, no, you can see that diversity shines through, and you're able to think outside the box, just like Mike. Because the way Mike thinks, he steps outside the box all the time. It's
Yeah,
never really,
totally.
yeah, he's never really thinking like everyone else. He's always questioning things, so open-minded as well. And even if he disagrees with someone, he's still willing to have such an in-depth, curious conversation. That I also
Yeah.
always sit and wonder, like, how
Yeah.
amazing his mind is. It's crazy.
He has this retreat every year where he takes some people with him that he likes to talk to, and they go to Greenland. And he's been trying to get me to go, but I'm a bigum. I can't go into those places and live uncomfortable lives. My dad was working in Uganda for a while, and the only way I would go on a safari was if at the end of the day I could be served with a five-course meal. Otherwise, I'm not going. I like my comfort. I like to read my book and, have a civilized thing. So I refuse to go to Greenland and live in that for whatever 2 weeks he likes to go to. I'm trying to convince Michael to hold the retreat in a nice park, national park in Utah or Montana or somewhere where we'll have civilization rather than,
Yeah.
I'm not born for cold climates. Like they go to Greenland and places like that. But I would do anything to spend a few days with Michael talking to him and just exchanging ideas because the emergent ideas will be so much better than what we are individually thinking about, I'm sure.
Hmm. And I think there's so many different applications that could have on your work. I mean, when you're thinking of the Sentinel, you, think
Completely.
you have this information you've got, but his work also goes into things like regeneration of limbs, metamorphosis, changing cellular information fundamentally, which we could then zap something with new information in essence and fundamentally change that cell. So not even kill it, but rather just change it back to a normal cell. There's so many different philosophical implications to his work, and I can see how well they could fuse together with yours.
Yes, completely. I couldn't agree more that there'll be a whole new paradigm of thinking about these things, even not just doing, but thinking.
Mm,
Because you talked about knowledge versus wisdom. And for me, one of the big differences is knowledge teaches you what you should do, but wisdom is when should you do it?
mm,
And should you or not? Those kinds of decisions I think are so important, especially to kind of reclaim cancer from this capitalism that we have established, to democratize it. And basically, I want to invert this model because right now, in America at least, the model is that you go and study cancer in mice. Then, if you find a gene of interest or a pathway of interest, then you come and ask, is it relevant in humans or not? I say to them, it should be just the other way. You should be studying humans first and then validating it in animal models. But why aren't you doing that? So their answer is, we don't have access to human tissue. And this is where our institutions have abdicated their responsibilities to the investigators. Because how is a PhD scientist expected to get a human sample? They have to work with a clinician who are full of arrogance themselves. In fact, their arrogance is somebody came to give grand rounds and his ego was so dense that light was bending around him. So this is the state of their affairs. How are they going to ever collaborate with anyone? But it's the institutional responsibility to make all these samples that millions of patients are walking around with, make them available for study. But because of some ridiculous bureaucratic hurdle of protecting privacy or something, they are hurting millions and millions of patients. And nobody is willing to even look at it, Teb.
Yeah, it's pretty disheartening. It's one of those things where you see it, we all see it all the time, and we know as doctors when we're following the clinical guideline and we're just trying to follow it to its core because medical legally we have to. There's so many other areas where we have to think about, but we know inherently that this is not what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
This is not what we signed up for. We came here to actually help people and not really just prolong their death in almost not the best way. And I think that raises an important question to you when you think about it, Azra. What would you say is a good life, and what would you say is a good death?
I would say that it's the kind of thing I tell my students all the time. Never marry someone you can live with. Only marry someone you can't live without. See, there's a big difference. A good life isn't just, to me,
Mm.
just making do with whatever is there. A good life is doing things you can't live without. And to me, a good death is one where first you feel that you have lived a good life. That's very important, that you have some satisfaction in knowing that. And success doesn't come in here at all. If you don't mind, I'll read one other couplet which summarizes my life. Justujу jiski thi usko to na paya humne. That which I was looking for, I didn't find. In other words, I've been looking for a curing cancer. I haven't cured cancer. But the second line is bahane se magar dekh li dunya humne. But through this journey, I swallowed the world. I experienced the world. So what the Buddhists say, that the only Zen you find on top of the mountain is the Zen you brought with yourself. To me, that is a good death, a death that comes with knowing that you gave your all to whatever it was you couldn't live without. That's failure, success is out of the question here. It is what your abilities were in order to dedicate yourself. And most importantly, it's all about love. Love drives everything. And love for people, love for your profession, love for poetry, all of these things are driven just by love. So I think a life which has been lived with good relationships, with love, with kindness, with compassion, with doing everything you can, that brings a good death. And a good death, medically speaking, and one is one where it's not necessarily the absence of pain, but it is a presence of choice. It's a presence of dignity. It's the presence of control and knowing that I'm making the decision myself, that a doctor isn't giving me this treatment to keep himself or herself out of jail, because they have been given this algorithm to follow, that the third line treatment for pancreatic cancer is dependent on Western New York's market share, so you have to give this treatment. No, a good death is knowing that I have control over when I want to go to hospice care and let nature take its course. That to me, I don't know. And let me give you one more thing. Maybe we are running out of time, but just a poetic thing here. I measure every grief I meet. This is Emily Dickinson. I measure every grief I meet with analytic eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has a different size. I wonder if they had it long or did it just begin. I cannot find the date of mine. It's been so long a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live and if they have to try and whether could they choose between they would not rather die. That is a good death.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that for all of those watching or listening, Azra is actually a very good poet as well. And you should check out her work because your work is pretty phenomenal as well. But Azra, you touched on something beautifully there, the words and how that matters so much. And someone named Susan Sontag warned us once against these metaphors of illness. I mean, when we think of cancer and language, we think of things like battles, warriors, victory. How do you think that this distorts our relationship to disease?
Well, semantics of war and battle kind of have a binary effect, that there are winners and there are losers. And that to me, first of all, is blaming the victim. If the cancer patient dies, it's their fault. They didn't try hard enough. They didn't fight. They didn't have the weapons of positive thinking or whatever it is you've decided to put in their thing. I mean, all this kind of stuff is, in a way, taking away the complexity of life, the complexity of living, and trying to reduce it into few phrases and words. And that is just wrong. I think Susan Sontag is absolutely correct. I have always reacted against these semantics myself, because really the only war going on in a cancer patient is a civil war, because they have not only cancer, now we are giving them poisonous treatments, and so their whole body is trying to attack. You don't know who's the enemy. Is the cancer the enemy or this poison coming in the enemy? The body is confused and there's a civil war going on. There is no other war, for God's sake. And again, the other thing that this language does, at least as far as I'm concerned, is it kind of paints the paints by using this military language. You are making patients into generals who have the decision power, or doctors into these captains of the ship, and none of that is true, for God's sake. All of us are ignorant. We don't know. There is a just one example. After my own husband died with a 5-year battle of cancer, my daughter was only 4 when he was diagnosed. So she's very little. When he died, she was 8 and some. After he's dead, like 2, 3 weeks later, she developed a flu and was pretty sick with it. But slowly started getting better. A week later, she was much better, except one morning she woke up and came out of a room crying inconsolably. So as a mother, my heart sank immediately that something is wrong. I said, Sherzad, what, are you sick? Are you worse? What's happening? And she couldn't even answer me for a few minutes. Finally, she said, no, mommy, I'm feeling much better now. But now I know how horrible it feels to be sick and how good it feels to get better. And my dad never got better. You're taking all this experience away by saying Harvey lost the battle to cancer. What about all that suffering and pain and the anguish of just leaving such a young child behind. Where is all that gone suddenly?
That's such a profound thing to say as a 4-year-old. And it takes you back to this one thing of where we all have 99 problems or 1,000 problems until you only have one, and that's sickness. The moment you have that one thing that strikes you, an illness, a disease, a cancer, that's when you realize everything you've been thinking about was such surface level BS.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then at some
Beautiful.
point, yeah. And then at some point you're struck with this one life-changing event that will forever change who you are and who everyone around you is, which is pretty,
Yes.
pretty crazy.
And by the way, young people know this difference. So Sherzad first loses her father as a child, and as a young adult of 22, her best friend Andrew, not her boyfriend, our Andrew was gay, but her best friend dies of deadly glioblastoma multiforme, the most horrible brain cancer known to mankind. He's dying at 22. So a week before he's dead in the hospital, the team just comes and hands him a DNR form to sign. Do not resuscitate. He said, I'm not signing it. I don't want to die, and sent them off. But that evening, Teb, his mother left and his father came to relieve her to spend the night with his son. As soon as the father came, Andrew called the team back and said, bring me the form, I'll sign it now. I couldn't do it in front of my mother because she wouldn't be able to take it. It's 22-year-old is protecting his mother. Monuments should be built to this quiet courage, this reverence. We should be hanging our heads down in reverence to Andrew.
Your life, Azra, has been personally touched by this, and you've impacted the field in so many incredible ways because of that. The legacy that your husband has left you with as well, and the way he's impacted you. How do you feel that that's changed how you've perceived this this world and cancer as a whole?
I think you hit it on the head because I didn't change really as an oncologist, even though I was his oncologist. But I was already an oncologist for 20 years when he was diagnosed. So it didn't change my style, but what it changed is my perceptions forever. And as Proust said, to discover new lands, you just need to have new eyes. You don't need to travel. And so just the same thing I was seeing as amputating a leg to cure a child with cancer, now I'm seeing and feeling good about it that we cured the child. Now I suddenly see that amputation as a travesty, as a horrible crime. How are we still doing it 50 years and 100 years later? So I think that what it has done for me is to discover the difference between discerning when to act and not can we or should we becomes suddenly very important because I am now deciding not just as a doctor but as also from the patient's perspective because Harvey handed me his decision power. And the most interesting thing to me was that for 5 years that he was sick, everything I did, arranging for babysitters or making sure that my lab is running, any decision I had to make was always guided by Harvey's illness. Do I have to give him chemo at this time? So I must do this at that time, you know. So for 5 years, the focus of attention of every choice I made in life was his illness. And he dies, and suddenly I'm feeling disoriented. Of course, the death was expected. That's not the point. The point is that focus was suddenly gone. And again, Emily Dickinson, I felt a cleavage in my mind, as if my brain had split. I tried to match it seam by seam, but could not make them fit. The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of reach like balls upon the floor. the disorientation, and the appreciation of what patients and families are going through, that they can't. You see, when you are in that active mode, adrenaline is driving everything you're doing, and you have no time to think. You need time. I needed years even to go back and listen to music. And the way I healed myself, for 2 years, I couldn't concentrate on anything until I decided to reread the 100 greatest books of Western literary tradition, starting with Sophocles and Aeschylus, and working my way down to Thackeray and Dickens and James, to now Rushdie and Ferrante. I mean, to really, because that's all I know how to do. I'm a big reader, as you can see. I'm owner of thousands of books everywhere. So that reset my mind. But then it made me realize what patients and their families go through. Patient dies, but now, how long is it going to come back to to their life, or ever will they ever get back to that? And what do they think about what decisions they would have changed? And in my book, The First Cell, I think something that is very unique in the book is that there are 7 chapters, each is about a patient. And at the end of the book, I go back to families of those patients I have lost and ask them, what decisions would you have changed now that you have luxury of time and this perspective you have developed, that, oh, I shouldn't have done this or done that. And no other book I ever saw has done this. And the weirdest thing is that every family member has come out saying they wouldn't have changed any decision because they didn't have any other choice, because to say don't treat would have been taken away even those last glimmers of hope, and would have accelerated their departure, perhaps their beloved ones' departures. And how could the mother of a 22-year-old Andrew, or 38-year-old Umar, or even me, Harvey's wife, how would I decide these things? You want the loved one to be there forever. The only thing people complained about was patients' families 10 years later are complaining about is the doctor's attitudes. For Andrew, the doctor was just one floor up. For the last 3 months that Andrew was admitted to the hospital, that doctor never descended one staircase to come and say hello to him. When Andrew waited every day for him, they would send teams of hospice care, teams of palliative, teams of pain management, and even a team handing him this form to sign. Think of that. That is the inhumanity that has come into everything, and that is what changed my perceptions forever. After being on the other side of the bed, standing on both sides simultaneously, those are experiences I don't wish upon my enemy, but it taught me something.
I think firstly, thank you for sharing those personal stories as well. I know it takes a lot to share that, and it obviously brings a lot of emotion out of you as well. But yeah, as we just touched on, that all problems go away and one problem becomes so magnified to a point where it fundamentally changes who you are when that problem is gone. Because it was the years after that were actually quite hard and difficult to deal with as well. If not for your love for the books and doing those things that you love, it would be very difficult for anyone to get back from that. And and I think all of this reflects the deeper problems within medicine, cancer research, doctors as a problem, us, the way we follow the guidelines, go through algorithms, forget that we're there for the patient first. I mean, Hippocrates, a lot of people back then, we knew certain things very important. I mean, one of the smaller things, like, I think it was Hippocrates who says, eat thy food as thy medicine, or one day you'll eat thy medicine as thy food. Just small things like that. Just those small things where you just shift your thinking a little bit, change the perspective, change the lens you view the world, can fundamentally change the medical field. And with that, Azra, I mean, as a closing, maybe, can you tell me well, we started with this, but maybe we can also end with it. Your ideal world of healthcare, cancer research, and just this field as a whole. Maybe one day we could dissect certain papers in more detail. But for now, as a nice round off, how would you see the future of medicine? Let's think of the thousands of doctors coming up. How would you like them to treat patients with cancer? And what would you like to see in the future?
Yeah. Well, my closing statement would be that everything we've been doing in cancer is wrong. We need to think very differently. Everything we're doing in research is wrong. Yes, there are successes, but they don't justify the number of lives we have hurt and the number of resources, both financial and intellectual, we have wasted over the years. So people keep saying, well, we have CAR T, we have treatment for this, but that's too few compared to. So going forward, I think we need to shift our focus from the last cell to the first cell in all of healthcare. We need to go for early detection and prevention and revolutionize uh, ways of early detection. We have amazing technology. We need to apply it at the right end of the field, not the wrong end, or it will become more and more dangerous and worse. So I feel that the last thing, of course, is that it's what is so beautifully said. Surgeons must be very careful when they test their knives, for underneath their fine incisions rests the culprit, life. The problem is not that there's a wart you can't cut off, but what lies underneath is real life. That life does come with warts and pain and suffering, and there is no end to it. You're not going to get rid of it by early detection and prevention. There'll be other kinds of suffering. So humanity must be taken as a complex thing. Life must be given its full complex colors. It's literally just, as you said, changing your thinking in a way where the human becomes the center of things and love becomes the driving force, and love for the human, love for preventing their suffering, their anguish becomes the moving engine of your life. I think that is what I'd like to leave everyone with.
And I think your message is very beautiful and should be well received. And I hope that people leave this episode thinking about this, taking this seriously, and even looking into cancer research and looking into this field with a different set of eyes. And
No, I want them to look into the Sentinel and please come up and help me.
yes,
Because go to my website, azraraza.com, and you can find all kinds of details there. And the more people that help me, the faster I can get it into patients, and all of humanity is going to benefit from it. I seriously mean it. This is not some abstraction or pie in the sky. This is all real. This is being done by the finest scientists in the world. So, unless you are not a believer in science, you need to step up and support the people doing the right things.
And I'll put links to all of those, Azra, and you can send me any further ones that you'd like me to put up on
Thank
my
you.
website as well. Thank you so much, Azra, for your time, for your incredible work, and for being the activist you are within this field.
Thank you, because you are the one who have come up with you came up with the most thoughtful, provocative, interesting questions. You weren't afraid to ask me about whether anything in my life, whether it's deeply personal or highly contentious, professionally speaking. You asked it, and you really have the full spectrum of the human patient to the most cutting edge science. So, congratulations at such a young age. You have incisive thinking and you are interested in new ideas. I really am very grateful to be on your podcast, because the people listening to you must also be of the same caliber if they're listening to you. So thank you very much.